In part 1 of this series of videos, I described my view of Germans based on my personal experiences with their wild ways and why I despise them, and how my exposes of them on my YouTube and Facebook channels, Unmasked Truth with Harmanjit Saini, are fulfilling another Bible prophecy. In part 2, I described God's opinion of the Germans. In this part 3 video, I describe what judgments God has made about the Germans in Bible prophecies and messages to me. In part 4 video, I will describe God's judgment on German masqueraders and other German allies such as Indians, Palestinians, and Pashtuns and Afghans. Hello friends, this is Unmasked Truth with Harmanjit Saini, where I provide unique analysis of world events based on the unmasked truth that after surrender, Germany continued World War II clandestinely and became a killing machine. I also provide true news that you will find nowhere else. In part 1 video, I stated, since World War II, the Germans have orchestrated almost every major conflict in the world and have clandestinely murdered 120 to 150 million worldwide, including through abortions. They have not stopped instigating new conflicts through their allies and fueling existing conflicts to keep them alive. Their goal is to conquer the world and rule it solely to their advantage. God is fully aware of their wickedness and has prophesied how he will deal with them, which I explained in part 2 video. But God has given plenty of guidance in the Bible and prophecies and historical accounts, as well as messages to me on how various allies of the Germans are to be judged. To describe those judgments, we must first understand the historical context about the Germans and their allies' dealings with other nations, but particularly the United States, British Commonwealth nations, and Israel, or UBI nations. I will discuss the German masqueraders in various countries in Europe, which are people of German ancestry living in other white countries, their allies China, the Palestinians, and India, their allies Rajputs, who are persons belonging to Rajasthan state in India, and Pathans, also known as Pashtuns in India, and the Pashtuns in Afghanistan and Pakistan. I will also discuss the UBI nations, their allies, the Sikhs and Punjabis, who belong to Punjab state in India, who are being targeted by the Germans for destruction. The most important thing to remember, to understand, is that the Germans will not give up their ways. They have swallowed Satan's guidance to them, hook, line, and sinker, that they alone of all of humanity have the divine spark in them, and they alone of all of humanity have an eternal future. They believe the rest of humanity have been created like any other animals, such as cats, dogs, cattle, and mosquitoes. They live out their physical lives, and that is the end of their story. Like other animals, other humans have been created to serve them, that is, the Germans. Therefore, their destiny is to rule over all of humanity. They have imbibed these Gnostic beliefs since the days of their original ancestor Asher, the grandson of Noah, and have been trying to rule the entire world ever since, now more than 4,000 years. They simply cannot live in peace with anyone else. They will continue to deceive, rob, clandestinely murder, and try to dominate their neighbors. When they are strong, they will use violence and bloodshed to conquer and enslave anyone they can. They take guidance from Satan and obey him without question. They will use diabolical, cunning, craftiness as directed by Satan and make alliances of convenience to achieve their goals. No country or people can live in peace and security with a strong Germany. Therefore, if a country or alliance of countries defeats them in war but does not drastically diminish their strength, within a few short years they will have to fight a war with Germany again. If the Germans are decisively victorious, their adversaries can expect terrible retribution from them. The two world wars, both started by Germany, should have taught us this lesson indelibly by now. Next, we must understand German masqueraders thoroughly. The most important thing to remember is the adage, once a German, always a German. For more than a century, Germans have been pushing Germans darker in color or with dark hair out of their country to migrate to other countries. Others may have settled in other countries as traders initially, but even in their new country, they never change their character and their loyalty is to Germany and its values. Just as Germany continues to try and dominate its neighboring countries, German masqueraders band together to plunder through deception and dominate all other ethnic groups in their respective countries and eventually rule the country. They also like to shed blood clandestinely for the sheer pleasure of it. We do not need to go too far to find examples. After World War II, before their presence was discovered, German masqueraders had taken over the entire economy of the United States and clandestinely started murdering whites of non German descent. Before their wicked deeds were discovered, which remained hidden for full 40 years, they ended up cremating alive 5 to 6 million white adults and children of non German ancestry and murdering 3 to 4 million more in medical murders and in other ways. They also forced the abortion of approximately 30 to 40 million white babies. All the violence in the United States was orchestrated by them, besides inflicting pain and suffering on the population in numerous other ways. Another example is Russia. Lenin and Stalin were German masqueraders who butchered tens of millions of Russians. They orchestrated about 100 to 120 million abortions in Russia during the same period. German masquerader Gorbachev orchestrated the breakup of the Soviet Union. They had looted most assets of the country when public sector enterprises were privatized before their identity as German masqueraders was discovered and the assets taken back from them. The current Ukraine Russia war was forced upon Russia because the Nazi Zelensky of Ukraine had given permission to Germany to install nuclear weapons and develop new chemical and biological weapons to be used against Russia. It posed an existential threat to Russia which President Putin could not ignore. Most of the massacres in French colonies after World War II were orchestrated by German masquerader French presidents Charles de Gaulle and Francois Mitterrand. These are enough examples to show that wherever Germans end up, they immediately become a source of corruption, cheating in business, violence, conflict, murder, and war. Calling them Huns, Winston Churchill best summed up the German character. A Hun alive is a war in prospect. After World War II, the American, British, and French people were forgiving of Germans and even helped their economy recover with the Marshall Plan. How poorly our people understood their character. We simply could not have understood it until in the early 1990s when we learned that Satan is their God and they take their guidance from him and do exactly as he tells them. The Germans had anticipated that they would lose the Second World War. Before the end of the war in 1944, they had already planned that after surrender, they will hook up with German masqueraders in the USA and implement an export led growth strategy. Just 2 years after their unconditional surrender, German masquerader President Truman allowed the government in Germany to denazify Germany. Soon, all the Nazis who survived the war were clandestinely back in power. They continued the process of corrupting all German masqueraders in the UBI nations to join them in the attempt to exterminate whites of non German descent and take over the lands for themselves. That is how they committed a genocide of 10 million whites, second only to what the masqueraders Lenin and Stalin did in Russia. As if that's not enough, in alliance with China, they have been trying to start the Third World War since 2014. Their soldiers are already fighting in Ukraine against the Russians. Bible prophecy indicates that they will attack the UBI nations, be victorious, enslave them, and ultimately kill 9/10 of their population. And 1/10 will survive because of God's help. 2 years after that victory, they will mobilize to plunge the world in continuous war for 1 year, destroying much of the world's population. Jesus Christ described the result of their actions in Matthew 24, verses 21 to 22. For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. And except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. The lesson in all this is that never ever entertain the hope that the Germans and German masqueraders will change their ways in our times or man's age. They will change only in God's kingdom. Therefore, the only viable security strategy in dealing with them is to leave as small a number of them alive as possible. The more of them you leave alive, the sooner they will be ready to start another war to exterminate you. To shed more light on the German character and some of their allies, we must understand the two broad ways of living. One is called Cain's way in the Bible, and the other is the way of working hard to make a living. Cain was the evil son of Adam and Eve who murdered his righteous brother Abel. As a result, Cain was banished from Eden. He went east from God's presence and wandered the earth for a century and a half. Then the ancient Jewish historian Josephus provides us additional details about Cain's activities after he came back and settled near Adam's other children. But Cain was not only very wicked in other respects, but was wholly intent upon getting, and he first contrived to plough the ground. A covetous man and gotten by forcing the ground. This is in Antiquities 1, chapter 2, verse 1. And when Cain had traveled over many countries, he with his wife built a city named Nod, which is a place so called, and there he settled his abode, where also he had children. However, he did not accept of his punishment in order to amendment, but to increase his wickedness. For he only aimed to procure everything that was for his own bodily pleasure, though it obliged him to be injurious to his neighbors. He augmented his household substance with much wealth by rapine and violence. He excited his acquaintance to procure pleasures and spoils by robbery, and became a great leader of men into wicked courses. He also introduced a change in that way of simplicity wherein men lived before, and was the author of measures and weights. And whereas they lived innocently and generously while they knew nothing of such arts, he changed the world into cunning craftiness. He first of all set boundaries about lands. He built a city and fortified it with walls, and he compelled his family to come together to it and called that city Enoch after the name of his eldest son Enoch. This is in Antiquities, Book 1, Chapter 2, verse 2. The following significant points can be gleaned from what Josephus has written about Cain's character and activities. 1. Cain was a covetous man who was wholly intent upon getting. He was completely self-centered and very wicked in other respects as well. 2. Cain was the first man to plow and force the ground. His farming practices devastated the soil. 3. Cain did not repent of his sin of murdering his brother, did not accept his punishment to change his character, but only increased in wickedness. 4. His only aim was to procure everything for his own bodily pleasure and comfort, even by injuring his neighbors. That means he was completely carnal and had no concern whatsoever for the welfare of others. He engaged in robbery, plunder, and violence to augment his wealth. 5. Cain became a great leader of men into wicked courses. This means he convinced his own children and later others among Adam's children, as the family grew over centuries of Cain's life, to follow his way. His wrong example was copied by others. Number 6. Cain was the author of measures and weights, which means he introduced trading into the world. By his statement, changed the world into cunning craftiness, Josephus implies that his weights and measures were dishonest. With the new art, Cain advanced his practice of getting further. Number 7. To have successfully introduced such a practice in the world, Cain must have had some commodities to sell which were in great demand. This was in fact the case. He forcibly took control of the salt, bitumen, sulfur, and supply from the Dead Sea area, which were used for construction, cementing flint blades and other tools and implements, and for waterproofing purposes. Sulfur was used probably for medicine and lighting fires. Cain thus forcibly took over the supplies of these materials to create monopolies. Number 8, Cain was the first to set boundaries about land. He occupied land and set boundary markers around it, or built fences, and would not permit anyone or their cattle or flocks to intrude on that land. He did that in land that belonged to Adam's other children and not to him, as he had been banished from that land. That is also how he created monopolies in salt, bitumen, and sulfur. Number 9. Cain built a city and fortified it with thick, high walls, and he compelled his family to come together to it. He did this for protection after his descendants would raid and plunder the crops and cattle of neighbors. So they ran to the fortified city for protection. Thus, Cain pioneered a way of robbing and plundering the wealth and goods of others by violence if necessary, and using any lies, cheating, and deception in trading to gain wealth. Later, Cain forced people, that is, most of humanity alive at that time, with threats of violence and bloodshed to pay tribute or protection money to him if they wanted to be left alone from his plundering activities. He imposed his rule over others and killed those who did not submit to his rule. That is what is known as Cain's way in the Bible. The other way is to work hard to make an honest living, such as in agriculture or using one's talents and abilities to make good products and sell them. Germans primarily practice Cain's way, whereas Israelite countries or UBI nations, the Jews, France, and other northwestern democracies, primarily practice the other way of working hard to make a living. The Pashtuns of Afghanistan have practiced Cain's way and victimized us Punjabis of North India for centuries, having invaded our lands and killed large number of males for plunder of wealth and enslaving women to be used as household servants or sex slaves. Before I discuss God's judgment on the Germans and other specific peoples, we must understand Bible guidance on the matter and the guidance God has given me in a message delivered through an angel. First, God has given guidance on dealing with those who deal with demons, called familiar spirits in the Bible, and pay heed to them. They are called wizards and witches. All Germans and German masqueraders pay heed to Satan and the demons and those who deal with them. Now, Exodus 22 verse 18 states, "You shall not suffer a witch to live." Leviticus 19:31, "Regard not them that have familiar spirits, neither seek after wizards to be defiled by them. I am the Lord your God." Leviticus 20 verse 6, "And the soul that turns after such as have familiar spirits and after wizards to go whoring after them, I will leave and set my face against that soul and will cut him off from among his people." Leviticus 20:27, "A man also or woman that has a familiar spirit, or that is a wizard, shall surely be put to death. They shall stone them with stones, their blood shall be upon them." So God commanded to utterly destroy the 7 nations whose lands the Israelites were going to occupy, stated in Deuteronomy 7 verses 1 to 4 and 16. "When the Lord your God shall bring you into the land where you go to possess it, and has cast out many nations before you, the Hittites and the Girgashites and the Amorites and the Canaanites and the Perizzites and the Hivites and the Jebusites, 7 nations greater and mightier than you, and when the Lord your God shall deliver them before you, you shall smite them and utterly destroy them. You shall make no covenant with them, nor show mercy unto them, neither shall you make marriages with them. Your daughter you shall not give unto her son, nor your daughter shall you take unto your son. For they will turn away your son from following me, and you shall consume all the people which the Lord your God shall deliver unto you. Your eye shall have no pity upon them, neither shall you serve their gods, for that will be a snare unto you." Such a command was given to utterly destroy people that lived in their land, and not of other nations which did not live with them. Different judgments were given on how to deal with them. Secondly, in another incident, the Midianites, through the counsel of Balaam, had caused Israelites to sin by the women, involving Israelite men in sexual sins. God commanded Israel to take vengeance on them. Israelites destroy all the males, but they kept women alive. Then Moses gave his judgment in Numbers 31 verses 14 to 18. "And Moses was wroth with the officers of the host, with the captains over thousands and captains over hundreds, which came from the battle. And Moses said unto them, Have you saved all the women alive? Behold, these caused the children of Israel through the counsel of Balaam to commit trespass against the Lord in the matter of Peor, and there was a plague among the congregation of the Lord. Now therefore kill every male among the little ones, and kill every woman that has known man by lying with him." But all the women children that have not known a man by lying with him, keep alive for yourselves. And number 3, further guidance was given in Deuteronomy 20 verses 10 to 18 regarding dealing with nations that attacked Israel. When you go near a city to fight against it, then proclaim an offer of peace to it. And it shall be that if they accept your offer of peace and open to you, then all the people who are found in it shall be placed under tribute to you and serve you. Now if the city will not make peace with you, but war against you, then you shall besiege it. And when the Lord your God delivers it into your hands, you shall strike every male in it with the edge of the sword. But the women, the little ones, the livestock, and all that is in the city, all its spoil, you shall plunder for yourself, and you shall eat the enemy's plunder which the Lord your God gives you. Thus you shall do to all the cities which are very far from you, which are not of the cities of these nations, that is the 7 nations that they were going to possess, but of the cities of these people which the Lord your God gives you as an inheritance. You shall let nothing that breathes remain alive, but you shall utterly destroy them, the Hittite and the Amorite and the Canaanite and the Perizzite and the Hivite and the Jebusite, just as the Lord your God has commanded you, lest they teach you to do according to all their abominations which they have done for their gods, and you sin against the Lord your God. Number 4, another important guidance is given in how God dealt with David when he was planning to attack his neighbor or neighbors to expand his empire, which God had not instructed him to do, and he had not inquired of God whether he should do so or not. That was sin against God. So God gave him 3 choices to receive punishment, which are stated in 2 Samuel 24 verses 11 to 16. And David's heart condemned him after he had numbered the people. So David said to the Lord, I have sinned greatly in what I have done. But now I pray, O Lord, take away the iniquity of your servant, for I have done foolishly. Now when David arose in the morning, the word of the Lord came to the prophet Gad, David's seer, saying, Go and tell David, Thus says the Lord, I offer you 3 things. Choose one of them for yourself, that I may do it to you. So Gad came to David and told him, and he said to him, Shall 7 years of famine come to you in your land, or shall you flee 3 months before your enemies while they pursue you, or shall there be 3 days' plague in your land? Now consider and see what answer I shall take back to him that sent me. And David said to Gad, I am in great distress. Please let us fall into the hand of the Lord, for his mercies are great, but do not let me fall into the hand of man. So the Lord sent a plague upon Israel from the morning till the appointed time. From Dan to Beersheba, 70,000 men of the people died. And when the angel stretched out his hand over Jerusalem to destroy it, the Lord relented from their destruction and said to the angel who was destroying the people, It is enough, now restrain your hand. Thus, God does not approve of Israelites fighting with other people to take over their lands. And number 5, finally, we must take into account God's judgment on the Baniyas of India, delivered to me through an angel in 2005, that they are to be utterly destroyed. In 2005, I received since then, I have had more than a decade to think about God's judgment delivered to me. I looked at the characteristics of the Baniyas. The glaring fact is that they live among the Punjabis and Sikhs, and that's why they could be so effective in dealing with the Sikhs by delivering threats electronically. They have discriminated against the Sikhs in a conspiracy with the Germans and carried out their discrimination clandestinely, systematically, and thoroughly, with devastating results on the Sikhs. They have used threats to prevent Sikhs, particularly the handsome and very intelligent ones, such as brilliant college professors, from marrying to control the Sikh population in general and the intelligent ones in particular. I know this from examples I have witnessed, such as a college professor at Indian Institute of Technology, Delhi, and a former bank manager at Punjab National Bank, and from my personal example as well. They have forced the most beautiful Sikh and Punjabi women to marry them with threats. They've incited violence and murder in Punjab through inflammatory journalism. They and their allies have murdered our chief ministers, who were the heads of government in the states in India. They thoroughly impoverished the Sikhs and enriched themselves fabulously at their expense. They were able to do this because they were largely the traders and shopkeepers. Their big industrialist suppliers were in conspiracy with the Germans, who supplied their products to the Banias at favorable prices. Therefore, others could not compete against them. Once they controlled the retail sector, they charged discriminatory prices to the Sikhs. They initiated and made bribery and corruption a way of life in Punjab. Most Punjabis, particularly Sikhs, did not practice the way of bribery and corruption in general. But when a particular ethnic group uses it to gain advantage, others are forced to fall in line in order not to be deprived of all opportunities for employment. And the worst of all was that they taunted Sikhs by coining the epithet, "All Sikhs go insane at 12 o'clock." Such epithets are highly offensive to any people. They learned these methods from the Germans, who tried to portray people as idiots or retarded who fought them in World War II. They did it to the Norwegians, and their stooges, the Banias, did it to the Sikhs. This is probably a large part of the reason God has pronounced his judgment on the Banias. And of course, the Banias and the Rajasthan Marwadis were behind all the attempts to murder me in India because I had shown some academic potential. And just as the German masqueraders poured filth on Israelites literally in America, literally, and by contaminating food, the Banias did it in India to the Sikhs. Using these Bible guidelines and with much prayer to God for further guidance, where the Bible guidelines are not specific, the following judgment should be applied for the atrocities committed by the Germans against UBI nations and their allies, the Punjabis and Sikhs. Whether it is militarily feasible is not the issue being considered. If militarily not feasible, then the judgments cannot be implemented. But if military situation allows, then the judgment should be applied. Germany's goal is to exterminate all whites of non-German ancestry and their allies out of UBI countries. They have already led a genocide of 10 million white Americans in the USA alone and forced 30 to 40 million abortions of white babies. The nation must be brought to justice for such horrendous high crimes. Up to two-thirds of Germans in Germany must be destroyed. Why two-thirds of Germans and not any other figure? Why not exterminate them completely? That's what my desire would be, to end this scourge once and all from the world. But prophecies provide guidance that this is not God's will, and I dread to go against God's will. Isaiah 19:24 to 25 show they will survive as a nation. Still, why two-thirds and not 50% or 80%? Now, David was a man after God's own heart, but he was involved in shedding much blood in wars. That's why God did not allow him to build his temple. Then we read in 2 Samuel chapter 8 verse 2, "And he, that is David, smote Moab, and measured them with a line, casting them down to the ground. Even with 2 lines measured he to put to death, and with 1 full measure to keep alive. And so the Moabites became David's servants and brought gifts." Commentaries differ on the interpretation of this scripture. Some think David killed two-thirds of the population, whereas others think he killed two-thirds of the prisoners taken. Since David was considered to have shed much blood, I thought that killing two-thirds of the population of a nation is the maximum limit, unless God has ordered that a people be utterly destroyed, like the Banias. I had to pray hard for making a judgment on how the Germans should be treated. Because of their extreme atrocities and the World War II Holocaust and the genocide they've orchestrated after the end of the war, the appropriate judgment I reached on them is that very close to two-thirds of the German population is to be destroyed. I was also thinking of how to meet the cruelty they've inflicted on our people as appropriate retribution. I believe the thought that was put in my mind was to not invent anything new, but inflict on them everything they've inflicted on us or anywhere else in the world in full measure. That is the judgment we shall apply, if we are able to do it so militarily. This is still showing their mercy as compared to what they have done around the world, killing 120 to 150 million souls in the cruelest ways they could devise. And their goal is to exterminate whites of non German ancestry and their allies in UBI nations. Killing two-thirds of them is still being merciful to them compared to their planning to kill 100%. It is also in keeping with God's prophecy through the prophet Obadiah in verse 15. For the day of the Lord is near upon all the heathen. As you have done, it shall be done to you. Your reward shall return upon your own head. So, in addition, God gave his judgments on the Germans through Nahum the prophet, as discussed in part 2 video, including the one in Nahum 3 verse 6. And I will cast abominable filth upon you, and make you vile, and will set you as a gazing stock. Remember, if God gives a prophecy about some people, he is charging people to fulfill it in precise detail as prophesied. Again, these judgments are made keeping prophecies in mind, such as the Germans surviving as a nation into God's kingdom. I also fear God and take his admonition in Deuteronomy 18 verse 20 to heart, which states, But the prophet which shall presume to speak a word in my name, which I have not commanded him to speak, or that shall speak in the name of other gods, even that prophet shall die. Thus, when I say I have prayed hard for an answer to a situation, and some inspiration or a thought is put into my mind, I do not make such claims lightly. In part 4 video, I will discuss God's judgment on various other people, such as German masqueraders in the United States and around the world and their allies, Palestinians around the world, different Indian ethnic groups, and Pathans, Pashtuns, or Afghans in India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. Thank you very much for watching this video. Please continue to watch my videos on important world events, World War III watch, politics, international business, how Bible prophecy is playing an important role in world affairs, advice on health and medical problems, and much more for in-depth and insightful analysis. Please also subscribe to my YouTube and Facebook channels Unmasked Truth with Harmanjit Saini to view and get information on the latest videos.